Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Kris Kaliebe, MD, who has been working with children, specifically at-risk children in the prison and foster care system. And in this conversation, we talk about a project that he is working on called the Gender Toolkit that seeks to provide information for parents about what their children are being taught in schools around this gender ideology. He's a wonderful man. Really enjoyed this conversation. You can find links to his work and the Gender Toolkit down there in the description. Without further ado, here is Kris Kaliebe. I'm totally open to talking about whatever you want to talk about. We met through the gender issue, but you have a storied career, and especially this juvenile psychological kind of field and corrections and the state of criminality, or like however you got into that. I'm really open to.
Yeah, that'd be great. I want to make sure that I do talk about the gender toolkit because I think it's a positive thing that's happening. It's basically as there has been this, erosion of trust in our actual institutions that are supposed to be creating things to inform parents and children about stuff. Since they have been a total fail, people have gotten together and created their own things. Yeah. And I think this gender toolkit is part of that. But as long as we cover that, I'm really happy to talk about anything. And as you see, I've done lots of different things at different times.
Yeah.
And,
well, let's not bury the lead. What is a gender toolkit? Do you get to is it just a Lego set of genitalia? You could just sort
exactly
you
like
want?
that. Now, it is for parents, and it's related to school. So it's if you've seen some of the output from what schools, either from the school curriculum or basically what how the rules have been written in some schools. Unfortunately, it is a radical change from what would be appropriate, evidence-based, compassionate ways to talk about sex and gender, as far as I'm concerned. And I think a lot of people would agree that confusing, very young children with theories about gender identity is probably not helpful for anyone. And then proposing that we should divide kids by gender identity rather than by biological sex seems to be a particularly terrible idea also. So we can go down the list.
Why would that? Yeah, why would that be a terrible idea? Why would gender identity constrain or confuse a child from your point of view?
Yeah. Well, children are very suggestible, for one. So children will believe and come to take in whatever they're told, especially by authority figures. And when a school is saying there's multiple genders and pick your gender and which gender are you, it plants a seed in the child's head. And then who would be more suggestible or more susceptible to suggestion? Then you'd have kids with emotional and neurocognitive problems would be the ones that are most likely to uptake some of this, some of these theories that may end up leading them to a place where they have discomfort with themselves in a way that never would have occurred had they not been, exposed to that, those theories.
From your point of view, gender identity ideology is discordant. It's not it doesn't lead to harmony within the person and within between the person and the society.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about gender identity theory and we're talking about a lot of these new ideas that have been brought forward regarding gender identity, they can be debated and we should be able to freely speak about them. But to roll them out as if we really know what we're talking about and we have a very confident proclamation that we're making progress when we start teaching children that there's 90 different gender identities, and this is going to be good for the child and good for the school system and good for learning and good for, and I'd say especially it's important to say, I don't think it's good for gender non-conforming kids, which I think is the most painful part of all this, is that really we're furthering the difficulties that gender nonconforming kids have a lot of, which is, it can be a rough journey as a gender nonconforming kid. And to plant the seed that maybe you were born in the wrong body or you're something other than the biological sex that you are, probably is, not helpful for those kids.
Mm-hmm. When did you stumble across this gender stuff?
Well, as a practicing child psychiatrist, you're going to always encounter patients that suffer, and they suffer in many different ways. You probably are familiar with some of the authors that, like Ian Hacking, that talks about the ecological niche, so that mental illnesses can kind of grow and flourish in certain historical and sociological, economical niches, and then fade away and fade through history. The other, the Edward Shorter's idea of the symptom pool, and that suffering is often transferred into the names and official designations that have been created by the medical system or the mental health system or by culture. And then therefore, if you express your suffering in a way that's understandable through these names, and then you get what might be called tangible rewards or other kind of incentives for following the script. Mm-hmm. And you have to worry that, is it possible we're shaping up kids to express their difficulty growing up, their troubles emotionally, their difficulties with their body, their way to navigate the world through paradigms that end up being unhealthy for the child.
Mm-hmm. How do you know what paradigm's going to be healthy and what paradigm's not going to be healthy?
Well, I guess we're trying to have children grow up that are reality based, that have skills, that are emotionally stable, that have some idea of what's going on in their culture and how to react to it and how they will do in their culture. And raising a child is an incredibly complex thing. And when we are trying to enculturate or socialize our children, we really never know 100% like what's the right way to do it or what's the best way to do it or what could be the ups and downs of different approaches. That being said, over time, societies have used certain ways to raise kids and have tinkered with different ways to run a school, to socialize children. And it seems to me that it makes sense that a lot of the things that work and people see are successful have continued and get modeled. And they, so over time, through tinkering and experimentation and cultural evolution, we've developed certain ways to raise children. And while there's always going to be pluses and minuses, and you never know when you're going to change that, what's going to happen. And so I guess you could, in theory, say, well, we're going to just, get rid of biological sex as a marker. We're going to go to gender identity. In this case, this is what people are advocating for, and run the experiment. Yeah. I think we've been running that experiment a little bit. And I don't think that it's running very well. And so, so you're asking a great question. We can kind of get into cultural evolution and the common, the ways that human beings have evolved really intermix with culture, and that we're a very cultural species, and that kids are naturally socialized and enculturated. And so I think parents are rightfully take much notice of where they put their children, what environments their children are, what ideas their children are exposed to, because they can have long-term and important ramifications. Mm-hmm. And I think this is part of what's concerning with the issues related to the school kit, the gender school kit, because the this has been a very rapid adoption of a bunch of very new ideas.
Yeah,
And
and
I don't,
wholesale too, like universally adopted across all these different states. It's not just like an isolated experiment. It just kind of took over everything.
yeah, and without the normal back and forth that you might expect from something that's going to affect people's children. So
Hmm.
you would hope that we'd have an open, honest uh, dialogue about what would be the positives, what could be the trade-offs, what's the justification for these changes. And it seems that there really has not been much of an open dialogue, and that we've sort of certain groups that wanted these changes to happen have seemed to, get them into schools in a way that really didn't, the parents were not aware of, and I think parents would not have approved of if they were aware. Um, and so that's why we need, when the school systems are kind of failing and the professional organizations and other people have not really stepped up to say, whoa, this may not be a wise idea. Um, we need people to create new institutions and new ways to, inform the public. And the Restore Childhood group was formed in a similar situation in some ways. So this is a group of people that formed after COVID, and it was a group of concerned parents, and they were not happy with the masking and the distancing and everything affecting their children's education. And they came out with a toolkit regarding that. And then now that COVID has at least somewhat faded into history or has become part of society, they've decided that this is an issue that's important and needs more discussion, and we need to have some thoughtful approaches that are not already wholesale in on the gender ideology.
So speaking or imagining speaking to somebody who's just kind of waking up in 2024, probably went to sleep around 2016 and then just woke up. With regard to the wholesale or almost wholesale adoption of gender identity ideology into the school system and the effects now taking hold or becoming manifest, what are some of the things that you've seen that for you convince you that this is unhealthy or a bad set of ideas? Like, how has it affected children that you, so far as you've seen?
Mm-hmm. So for one, any child that expresses at any time discomfort with their body, or the idea that they are maybe gender nonconforming, could be then encouraged to see themselves as possibly being in the wrong body or transgender. And there's this whole idea of a transgender child, which I think if you went back to 2016, you would say we have transgender children, and most people would say, well, that seems like a really nonsensical idea. And even if you talked about early onset kids that were girlish boys or boyish girls, most of them just grow up and be our same sex attracted adults. And that's not really, you don't need to call them a transgender child because they're going to grow up and not be transgender. So I think a lot of stuff has changed, but so there's many examples of kids that then once a therapist kind of gets hold of them, the therapists in the schools are also taught that they're supposed to affirm the new identity, that they're supposed to figure out, hey, are these parents affirming parents? Now in different states and different locations, you have different rules. But in some places, they are filling out forms and checklists. What is this, a affirming parent that we're going to talk to and we sort of like and we feel as a good parent? Or is this a non-affirming parent, which is, a knuckle dragging Neanderthal horrible parent? And that parent, we can hide this information from. And so we can do assessments, we can do therapy with the kid, and we don't need to tell that parent who's non-affirming, because we know better than that parent how to handle this situation. And so that's, seemingly in California, they're coming up with something that's making this sort of the rule of law, that they are not going to be telling parents about the child's new identity and the new name and the social transition going on at school. And so have I seen kids, or do I know people who have had their kids socially transitioned at school? Yes.
Okay. And is there a precedent for schools behaving in a way to drive a wedge between the parents and the children, or like exceptions like mental health care, addiction issues, abortion? Was there something that led up to schools taking it upon themselves to be the parental units?
Yeah. Well, this is very foreign to me. You could certainly go back to, let's say, the Indian schools of, 100+ years ago, whereas Indian children were taken out of their culture and
Yeah.
separated and educated in a way to intentionally uh, destroy the culture that they had come from and make them part of a new, Western, in theory, better culture. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I think we look back at horror with that, and I don't have other examples of modern school systems sort of deciding, they know better than parents,
Yeah.
and we're going to exclude parents that don't, that are not going along with our viewpoint about how a child should be raised or spoken to, uh, or if the parent is asked about these issues, it also seems like there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, which seems really incredible because, for one, a lot of times these interactions are starting with teachers. And I don't really understand how a teacher could feel qualified to make these decisions about children and to know what's best for their, and I think it mostly comes out of people who mean well, and that the teachers feel like this is a thing that they are, sort of supposed to get involved with. But it seems a terrible idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there could be precedent with regard to child abuse, right? I forgot what it's called. Like you're a mandatory reporter. That's what it is when you work in certain school or with young children. You're required by law to report any sort of abuse. So there is precedent for the state stepping in between the parent and the child, taking the child under its own wing. So the precedent's there, but like the language with regard to gender, or like why gender and sex was the thing that just had teachers and administrators completely ignore the parents or treat them like basically like unworthy, near criminals for not agreeing with the child or not going along with this particular program. It seems really egregious right now. I mean, it actually is egregious and stuff. So what are some of the things in the gender toolkit that you guys have developed
Yeah,
that kind of counter that?
Yeah, I think the nice thing about this toolkit, for one, it's pretty simple with like pictograms and photos, and it's easy to digest. And so there's also a scannable little link that can take you to more. So there's pieces on it where you can hit that little QR code, and then it'll take you, deeper into any of these subjects. But for one, it just provides basic information in a truthful, factual, helpful way for parents so they understand a lot of the slogans that are being thrown around today. Would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter, or some of these other kind of things that people are saying about suicide, about how helpful that these transitions are, that social transition leads to this great outcome. I mean, many things that are being thrown around these days. Or just inaccurate. So it has some information on that. It has the idea of the school to clinic pipeline, which I think is an important idea because once you get referred to a gender clinician in the modern era, that any parent should be very concerned that they're going to be on a pipeline to gender transition.
Yeah.
Because the philosophy of these clinics is that there's one solution to this problem. It's medicalized, and that's our job to, medicalize kids who meet the criteria. There's also a bit on the basics of sex-based, looks at kids and gender identity looks. So there's some nice stuff on that. And then there's stuff about what are parents' rights? What do they need to know? What's the best way to advocate at the
Hmm.
school? So it has some just practical things that most parents, wouldn't really know and
Yeah.
maybe, need to know in the modern era.
Do you see it inevitable that there's going to be a challenge? I guess in Florida, Florida's kind of drawn some lines legally with the governor and stuff like that. Do you see promise? Could you just talk about Florida itself? Like, have they, from your point of view, made headway with this or done the right thing in how they've gone about trying to, deal with this issue?
Well, I would say that politics is always a blunt instrument to address these things. And it's
Okay.
unfortunate that I think we have needed some political remedies to try to, restore some normalcy to the situation. I think the positive would be they have, there were some laws passed to basically say, between up to third grade that we don't want gender ideology taught in schools to make things developmentally appropriate. A lot of this, I think, will still continue to be challenged in the court. But I think the fact that we're passing some laws that are going to put people on notice and make some restrictions. So we are not in a free for all, and kids are getting appropriate information. That being said, whenever you have a politician getting involved and you have politics driving solutions, the
Mm.
tribalism in the world
Yeah.
rears its head. And I'm not trying to affiliate myself. And I think the people who are making this toolkit, I mean, we're not like part of a political party or a political movement or anything like that. We're trying to be fact based and help kids and be supportive to kids. And it is a little unfortunate that even if a politician gets in with reasonable laws considering the situation, you now are creating pushback, and those people who don't like that politician are going to demonize the politician, and then also it will color how these
Mm.
how these issues are portrayed. So I think people kind of coming to understand what's going on, and grassroots parents trying to make these changes
Yeah.
and parents trying to drive this is a much better solution to these problems than political solutions.
Well, yeah, just with one caveat that ideology is inherently political itself, so I mean, it's already politicized. And, you bringing up accuracy and facts and normalcy, those are all coded as far right ideologies that are fascist. And I'm not even joking. Like, that's what the other side says about anything that's trying to push back. And the list of far right qualities grows by the day almost. So it's really difficult to thread that. And so with that said, to what degree are you aware of that, or how do you just let that kind of political stuff kind of roll off your back?
Well, it might be impossible to thread that in the current era, which I would agree with you that this is the success of this gender ideology movement has been because it is so frankly political that everyone feels that they're on some mission
Mm,
to push this ideology, and that's going to make the world a better place.
yeah.
And so I think you're uh, asking how we're going to thread this. I mean, I think that the toolkit speaks for itself and how balanced it is. If you
Mm,
look at how the facts are presented, it's not ideological. It tries to look at the evidence base regarding social transition, regarding medicalization. It tries to be honest about what's going on in school. So we can, all you can do is try. You
yeah.
can't please everyone. And of course, as you're saying, a lot of dialogue these days consists of people wanting to just demonize or stigmatize the other group rather than engage with the facts. And I think if you look at this toolkit, and if you have, there's ways to give us feedback. And if you think that we got something wrong, or one of the facts is wrong, or there's something that is inaccurate, we'd be happy to hear, and we will change it. But so we're willing to deal with criticisms that are fact-based and that are asking, appropriate kind of questions.
Mm,
But in this particular sphere, it seems like hurling invective upon the person is often the means of argumentation.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I don't think you can get into this and not think that that might
Mm.
happen.
Yeah.
But that's how it
You,
goes.
you've used this very funny word or interesting word called appropriate a couple times now. So how do you, or what are your thoughts on gauging what is appropriate or inappropriate to talk about with a child? Age appropriate or, in other ways, right? Because every culture is going to be a little bit different about how open they are with sexuality or how closed they are with sexuality. And it seems like the schools wholesale have adopted a very particular point of view that you said is inappropriate. So how do you gauge what is appropriate, what is inappropriate? Because that seems like one way that this ideology, these political actors have been able to get so far by deconstructing just the concept of what's normal and what's appropriate. I mean, it's actually in the queer theory that formulates the gender ideology as this trenchant desire to deconstruct the normal and the inappropriate. So how do you push back against that? Where do you draw the line? How do you know?
Yeah. So I think one thing that when we say appropriate regarding children, there's a long-standing, I mean, when you train in child psychiatry, when you work
Yeah.
as a child psychiatrist, a lot of the challenges that you face with kids that you treat are due to their developmental issues, right? So it's kind of hard to grow up and it's hard to overcome developmental challenges. And when you're young, there are certain things that are very tough to do. When you get older, some of those become easier. And so we're traditional schooling has a whole bunch of um, methods for moving kids along at the right stage for what they can handle cognitively, emotionally, for what sort of a what range of you tend to want to have more simple stories and fables and that when they're really little and things get more complicated as they get older. And so one thing about appropriate is if you look at what a typical book for a kid would be, you would see that it would usually deal in themes that are, either very kind of black and white or down to earth,
Mhm.
simple skills. If you remember, I don't know if you're a Mr. Rogers fan, but you know how he wore very plain clothes, he spoke very slowly, he made sure to do introductions, he was very polite, he was trying to teach kids on a certain level through the program because he knew that his audience was at the place where that was the way to help them move forward and understand these things. And so as you have said, this introduction of really some more sophisticated theory into these children at an age when they really can't understand the theory, and it would really seemingly to displace sort of
Mm.
some of the standard things like the binary, right? I mean, it seems a political mission of some people to plant some confusion whether or not humans are a sexually dimorphic species. And it seems to me that if you're not willing to acknowledge that humans are a sexually dimorphic species, that you are way off from where any logical, reasonable human being should be having a conversation with.
Okay.
And so I think this is some of the stuff that has been snuck in and creates confusion because it's not starting from this basic thing that we all know we are just slightly evolved primates and male and female are fundamental. There can be no, the species does not move on without the male gamete hitting the female gamete.
Yeah.
And there's only two of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've covered this issue from several different angles, the theoretical side, the political side, and then I've also interviewed a lot of people who, took this ideology into themselves, internalized it, and then went through series or to some degree or another of transition. from your perspective, working with children and being a professional, psychological professional with children, what does it do to a kid? What does this stuff do to the mind, the development of children? Or we can go in a different direction. What happens to kids who are developmentally delayed or get some bad ideas in them? And then what's the process of becoming, like, figuring that out, or reverse engineering, or going on a different developmental path? You know.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that we can see for sure is that these theories have taken hold in susceptible young people. And so it seems like many young people who are doing well, who are well cared for, who are successful, do not have any need for these theories, and it doesn't seem to affect their life as much. But if you have a neurocognitive disorder such as autism or ADHD, if you have depression, if you have anxiety, if you're in foster care and you've been abused, if you've been sexually abused, if you're gender nonconforming and have struggles related to either internal or external homophobia, those are the people who are more likely for these ideas to take hold with and to become a part of them and to be a problem. I mean, if you look at statistics, everything I just told you is easily verifiable statistically. And so, it's not the super successful kids that are adopting gender ideology for the most part. It's kids who are struggling in one way or another. And so, sadly, we are really, if anything, harming some of the more fragile, the more at-risk kids by, promoting ideas that seem to deny basic reality of biology and provide them with a number of, non-functional ways to see the world.
How is this non-functional, in your opinion?
Back, as you said, to some of the underlying, queer theory or underlying, so, this is trying to break down the reality of biological sex and make it be just another theory like anything else. And it's replaced biological sex with gender identity, which it actually says is even more important than your biological sex. So it is now taking this, pretty ephemeral thing of gender identity. I mean, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about your comfort with your biological sex? Are we talking about what gender role you have? Are we talking about an inner belt sense? And how
you're attracted to? Yeah.
So really, we're taking this constantly evolving ephemeral thing that we're calling gender identity, although we often really don't know what we're talking about, and it switches what we're talking about as per the user's preference. And it is, when we're displacing the primacy of biological sex in a sexually dimorphic species. And so, that's where I think, you're entering and you're providing confusion and upset, and you're getting kids off of the track of, and the other issue is we really want our kids to go to school to learn how to read and to do math and get physical education, and maybe they can learn an instrument, and maybe they can do drama, and maybe they can and I don't understand why this really needs to be a part of any of that, right? So this seems to mean another diversion from the core. In fact, it's anti-truth, which is also a problem that I have, because I feel like schools, at schools, the things that are anti-truth,
Okay.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it just seems of all places that should stand for the truth. You would hope your school would. You just would think that, a school, you send your kid to school and they're going to get facts and it's going to be truthful. And a lot of this it really makes, major attempts to avoid being truthful.
What led you to child psychology?
Well,
as a career?
I'm a psychiatrist, but
psychiatrist. I'm sorry, you guys always. There's so many different labels, so I appreciate being corrected.
It's not a worry. So, I'm very blessed to have the job that I have. I have a great job. I get to help people. It's fascinating. It's very challenging and humbling. It's not an easy job,
Hmm.
and it's really humbling. I also love to teach, and so I've been very involved wherever I've been. I've always had a large teaching role. So I teach medical students and child psychiatry fellows and forensic psychiatry fellows, general psychiatry residents. So I do some adult. I do adult work. I have a resident clinic with adult patients also. So I think it's great to help people. I enjoy the job. I believe myself to be good at it. I've gotten lots of feedback that I'm good at it. I think people get pulled into child because if you can help people move forward in a positive way when they're children, you can have a downfield effect, that's really profound. And I think
Hmm.
all of us would love to make that happen and be part of that. Um, and I think everywhere in psychiatry, you also do have a lot of human suffering that's, it takes some real expertise to figure out what is the right approach. We have some people who we treat who have severe neurocognitive problems, and they may need one approach. You get individuals who are part of a dysfunctional family system, they need one approach. You get
Okay.
individuals who are struggling due to their school or other environment, they get a different approach. So the level of complexity is enormous.
Yeah. What is the guiding principle? Like, what's the aim? Like just like a well balanced human being, or somebody who's less suffering, or who process suffering. I guess you don't want to make somebody who take all the suffering out of life. Maybe you do. Maybe that's ultimately the end
How
goal.
could you?
Well,
I don't think it's
yeah.
possible. I don't think it's possible. But yeah, so we're trying to get people to function as best they can function. We're trying to get people to not to different people present for different reasons. And so in child, they are often brought by a caretaker, or if I work in juvenile corrections, they're brought, they're arrested and they come into they're taken into care. And so some are there because someone else has told them they have an emotional behavioral learning problem
Yeah.
that a psychiatrist could possibly help them address. In adult psychiatry, for the most part, you're dealing with people who come to you intentionally and want your services. And, so child is a mix.
Hmm.
Sometimes they want to be there and sometimes they don't.
Hmm. What's some of the tricks that you've learned to overcome the patient who doesn't want to be there, the kid?
Well, I don't make any pretense that I can help all people all the time. So
Yeah.
I think, for one, if people want to change, then their ability to change is exponentially larger than those who don't want to change. And so I'm
Yeah.
trying to assess for stage of change, motivation to change, what part of them do they want to change. A lot of times you can align with a kid over something like, if you don't come, they don't come in and you don't start with like, hey, tell me about the time you were in that psychiatric hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to start with a kid like, hey, I like that shirt. Where'd you get it? Or like, hey, what video games you playing? Or what books do you read? Or hey, what do you do for fun? Or what do you want to
Yeah.
do when you grow up? And so you can try to figure out what type of person they see themselves possibly becoming, and help them with their goal of becoming that person that can be successful.
Yeah. Well, what's the particular challenges for corrections, working in juvenile corrections? And why would you be
Wow.
good at that? What would make you good at that if you were to be
Um,
believed that you're successful in your field?
Yeah. So I think, for one, kids in juvenile corrections, for the most part, are tough kids who've been through a lot. Many of foster care, many have parents who were very troubled. Many of them grew up in rough neighborhoods. So for the most part, they're not biologically impaired. Like, you're not getting a lot of profound autism or other kind of developmental delays. You're getting
Hmm.
kids who are sort of capable, but they just have had a lot of adversity in life. And so you're treating a lot of trauma, and
Hmm.
you're trying to help people come to peace with the difficult experiences they had and navigate the system. So I love helping kids do that. I mean, I think that's something that I'm good at. I've done a lot of therapy, and some psychiatrists are not experienced therapists, but I have taken the craft of therapy very seriously, and I think I can do a good job of just connecting with the kids and giving them some real practical advice to help them with their anger problem or their anxiety or whatever else is going on where their life is not where they want it to be.
Trauma is a term that's kind of been subject to some sort of inflationary principle. A lot of psychological terms suffer this for some reason. Like people get a hold of them, they leak out of the lab, so to speak. What is trauma basically, and how do you approach? And I know this is all personal, and it's all tuned to each individual. But how do you recognize that? How do people deal with that? Move on from that? Like what's your experience with that, and as a specialist with children?
Yeah, I think most people, most of the time, get through whatever trauma they have without professional help. And so, for one, you want to support any natural resilience and coping skills that someone has, and you don't need to treat them as if they must talk about things and they need to go through some special process in order to in order to overcome or come to peace with what they've been through.
Yeah, not every session's like a Goodwill Hunting kind of like, I'm going to break down this child and we're going to weep in each other's arms kind of thing.
No, that's not what. But it is true though that some people are holding on to their trauma, and by now it's gone a long way, and they need a process in order to help them. Probably to some degree they've been avoiding, and even though they have intrusive thoughts and it's messing up their life, but they avoid trying to think about it because it's so distressing. So you're hoping to build skills first, and then as possible, especially if they're willing to and want to engage, then helping them sort of experience the trauma a little bit, at least, and then basically coming up with a new narrative, a way to see the trauma. So you're at the end of like trauma-focused cognitive therapy, they're writing a trauma narrative to help reconceptualize what happened to them.
Yeah.
And you're giving them a skills toolkit so that when they're feeling distressed, they have ways to manage their emotions better, or block negative thinking, or basically handle some of the intrusive thoughts or arousal that they get whenever they have a trauma trigger.
The skills is such it sounds so bland, but it could be like anything from breathing techniques to, I guess, some sort of weird mantra that you say. Well, like, what do you mean by skills? Like, what are some of these skills in this toolkit?
Well, diaphragmatic breathing is very commonly used. Yeah. So the deep breathing, slow exhales, we use that. Some meditation, but traumatized kids tend not to really like meditation. The calm is almost too much for them a lot of the time. So it depends, especially my population that I'm working with. That's not the first thing that you go with. I have a lot of special cognitive therapy techniques where I can get them to help reframe a situation that they're in.
Well, is this like a process of like question and answer? You go through like some sort of kind of algorithm of, you have a stimulus and then you go through like certain steps. Is that what?
Yeah, so Socratic questioning is probably the most important element of what I do, sort of asking, hey, what's going on? What did they do? What was your response? Yeah. What came next? And I'm trying to get the kids to realize that other people don't, let's say, make them angry, that they have some control over to what degree, or maybe they have an initial angry instinct, but then they have thoughts that go along with it that compound the anger, and that if they continue with that angry line of thinking, they just become more and more. And a lot of the kids ruminate over, let's say, their hatred for another youth or a guard or whatever, and then they get worked up. And so you're trying to break these dysfunctional chains, that the kids get caught in.
Yeah. What over the course of your life, what has been kind of the the guiding principle that's kept you on the right path for yourself, or like in the good spot yourself? Or do you think you're one of those blessed people who kind of is naturally just functional? And
No, I don't know if that I would say I'm naturally. I think I'm a hardworking person, and I want to work hard. I do think, when I was young, I was like, well, work hard, play hard. I used to say, but
yeah,
but I think that it is important to appreciate if you can, if you live in the modern world that we have with all these amazing things, and you can't appreciate it. That's really that's showing no gratitude or appreciation for all those who struggled to create the wonders that we have.
yeah.
So I think ingratitude is a sin that many are committing these days, and I try not to commit that sin. So I'm very thankful. I also would say it may be to some degree luck in life that you wind up in a place that fits your talents and skill sets and interests. And I'm just very blessed to have a job that I love. And, I don't want to tell people that wouldn't get paid to do it, but I
Yeah.
get up, I do a lot of stuff for free, that I'm not asked to do anything for this toolkit or anything like this. I'm just doing it because I believe it makes the world a better place. And so I'm really trying, because I'm in a blessed position to be able to affect
Yeah.
change and be part of the dialogue. So that's what I want to do.
So when did you get involved with Restore Childhood? Was it when they switched to gender from the COVID issue, or?
Well, perhaps you could say that I wrote on their Substack an article about how I've been thwarted in my attempts to have a proper scholarly dialogue on gender. So one of my main complaints about what's going on in the world these days is that you would think universities and academic institutions, and you would definitely think medicine, that you're having a rigorous discussion about treatments and people are able to voice concerns, and those concerns are being then thoughtfully replied to, and then we're coming to some consensus. And in this particular part of medicine, and I'd probably say some other more politicized ones, there was never any real discussion of, hey, we're going to move to this model, and these are the trade-offs, and these are the benefits, and this is why we're doing it with this justification. It seems a few articles were thrown into the journals, and then all of a sudden our professional organizations got behind this. And I think, it was a very small number of people co-opted the prestige. So I'm quite upset about it, because I think it's terrible that professional organizations have placed their prestige by such a dysfunctional approach to this issue. And I think they've severely undermined their ability to advocate on other things that are actually the good things that these professional organizations do. They serve a lot of important purposes, and they've really undermined their own credibility on it. But that was mostly what I was writing about. And so I think I was referred by another child psychiatrist who had worked with them, who said, hey, they would be interested in having you write something. And in part, I'm writing there because whenever I write articles to the medical journals, they do not get accepted, because this is how medicine is these days.
At all?
You
haven't been canceled, you just haven't been accepted.
Yeah, I mean, I have a letter to the editor replying to a terrible article in a law journal, and I did get in the newsletter of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which is kind of a low prestige place to publish, but I was able to publish there. But yeah, I've written a bunch of letters to the editor and articles, and they're have submitted. I mean, this is public knowledge. So I had the lady who ran the gender service in Finland. I had someone who's involved with a systematic review from Sweden. I had Michael Biggs from Oxford, all to present research, and I had the past president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, all to present at the New York ACAP last year, and that presentation got rejected.
Huh.
Whereas, I was the chair of what's called the media committee for 8 years for ACAP. And all we ever hear is, we want, research, and these are always going to accept it. And we really love international presentations. And, so this is exactly the type of presentation, which is a slam dunk, which on any other subject would automatically be accepted. But because the data that they're presenting is not data that goes along with gender affirming care, basically,
Yeah.
because the data tends to undermine gender affirming care. We were not accepted. I also had a presentation, the same, a different presenter to do like a clinical perspective. So I had one on research, one, but same thing, one from Sweden, one from Finland, one from England, past president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, rejected again. So that's just, those are that's the most egregious of my rejections.
Hmm.
And even the internal, even within the organizations, they admit that it's politicized, and they admit that this is going on, yet they haven't done anything about it.
Are you connected? Is there a growing swell of discontent within the professionals that use these professional organizations to maintain their credibility with the behavior on this issue? Or do you think that most people are turning a blind eye? They're still not aware of what's going on with regard to the data not matching the recommended protocols?
Well, I think it's a mix. So for one, you have a bunch of people who really don't read it. I mean, a lot of people like just, hey, the experts say this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And
But
usually
they
in
are, I'm
medicine,
talking about the experts, though.
well, the experts have self-selected into this small group that performs, that are at the gender clinics and stuff. So they're the ones who've been driving the organization, but it's the other people who won't stand up and go, hey, this is kind of crazy and it doesn't really make sense. Why are more people not doing that? I think, for one, because this whole issue became so polarized and stigmatized, that if you stand up and say something, and psychiatrists are not like, we're not the most courageous
No.
group of people. I mean, come on.
The Schwarzeneggers of the medical field,
So,
generally
so
speaking.
yeah, and people get into this because they want like a warm fuzzy, and they want to have a positive relationship. I mean, this is part of
Yeah.
why we overprescribe, because we have trouble saying no. We want to please.
Highly
This
agreeable,
is,
yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the psychological profile of us and pediatricians is
Yeah.
that we're easily pushed around and we don't fight back. I mean, it's obvious that that's the case. And so many of us are being pushed around and silently would love to say something, but also you have to consider with the capture of these universities, if you're at like a Northeastern university, you really, you're taking your job into your own hands if you're honest about any of this stuff. I'm sad to say, but I mean, these like prestige universities have DEI. I mean, you look at what Carol Hooven at Harvard, I'm sure you know the story, but she left Harvard after a DEI administrator attacked her on Twitter for her giving her viewpoint on the thing that she's the world's expert in.
Yeah.
So she's the world's expert in it. She's the content expert. And when she says her opinion publicly, she gets attacked by a diversity, equity, inclusion person on Twitter, and no one from Harvard defends her. So if you're at Harvard, you pretty much know what you can say and what you can't say in public. I mean, maybe now after this thing has blown up, I think Harvard is in the process of reforming itself.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
Harvard was one of the most egregious, if not the most egregious, squasher of free speech. I mean, they got less than zero on the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, survey. So it's the lowest score anyone's ever gotten.
What's the arc towards reform of the professional organizations, especially with regard to pediatrics, clinical?
Well,
I
think
is it changing? Do you see it changing soon, eventually?
I don't really know. I think with all the incredibly embarrassing stuff that's coming out now that the WPATH files have been revealed, and now that what happened with HHS has been revealed, so who knows? That may cause some reforms. I also think there are groups now like Heterodox Academy that have grown out, so basically Heterodox Academy, Jonathan Haidt and others formed as a place where people can have rigorous and open discussion on anything. And it's to basically restore what a university used to be, when it wasn't all like, hey, we're going to do advocacy, and then you can do science as long as it doesn't interfere with our advocacy. Basically is kind of what the universities have become. And so, as Heterodox Academy and other groups like that get stronger, I think it's going to make it will influence the university, because there will be people talking about these things. I mean, I got to present on gender at the Heterodox Academy conference in Chicago recently, and my presentation was about the chain of trust being broken in gender medicine.
Hmm.
And those are the kind of presentations that I
Yeah.
couldn't get on stage at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. I couldn't get on stage with I had a much less confrontational ones that I get rejected for in those places. So they would definitely not let me be honest about what's going on in gender medicine.
Hmm. That chain of trust is a really important concept. Could you expand on that just a little bit more?
Well, yeah, and there's many different sort of spheres of the chain of trust. But in medicine, when you come in as a medical student, you look up to the residents above you and the attending above you, and then let's say the local expert on whatever a topic is. And you're kind of expecting that the training that you get is going to be high quality information from the expert that flows through the local attending, local expert, then to the resident and who trains you as a medical student, let's say. So there's a whole established way that we train people, and probably to some degree, we since I train, I talk about this stuff all the time. There is something to the apprenticeship model, and there's value in it. Then again, there is also value in the evidence-based medicine, and that we need to do systematic reviews. We need to really be honest about the evidence, and we need to take out people's personal experience, because personal experience can fool us.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to balance some apprenticeship models where you can model what's a good way, let's say, to do an interview, with a evidence-based, approach to treatment. And basically in gender medicine in particular, but there's other parts of medicine where this is a problem, we've absolutely destroyed that train of trust, because we allowed people to come in at the top and not be honest about the evidence that they were presenting so they downplayed the risks and overplayed the benefits. And no one was sort of willing to stand up to them. And if you look, the Carol Hooven thing is just one of many, many.
Yeah.
I had a whole presentation of things that have happened to people because they were honest about gender medicine, and how many people have left the field, and how many people don't practice, and how many people were fired from their jobs. Psychiatrists fired from their jobs. This has really happened. And so, yes, you can't trust the experts. No one person has any monopoly on the truth, and we need experts to be able to debate each other and dialogue, and then people decide sort of what's the best idea. And that absolutely hasn't happened.
Is there a alternative professional organization that, I guess you brought up the Heterodox Academy, but is there need for a professional organization along the lines of the American Academy of Pediatrics? Is that possible?
Many people have talked about starting other organizations.
So there's a desire, maybe not the will, but the desire to do that.
Yeah. There are people who would like to do that. There's also this thing called the Open Therapy Institute, which I am dipping my toe in. And I said, so once again, there are people who are coming up with alternative institutions. I'd say GenSpec is a great example. SEGM is a great example. Yeah. So in gender medicine, since the establishment is so dysfunctional and has failed us, we now have two highly functional, well-run and smart organizations that we can turn to. So, thank goodness in that subject. But everywhere else where the same groups are sort of failing, we don't have that.
Is there a way to light a fire under the ass of your colleagues to get some change effected?
Well, I think that, it's interesting. Maybe like nothing will happen, and then maybe all at once there will be a whole, I kind of feel like that especially with this particular topic, because what has happened has been so egregious. And the professional organizations have behaved so badly that I think it won't be that hard for people to turn on them. However, there are people that are going to really not want to admit. You think about the narcissism of doctors, right? So, they've made these terrible mistakes, and they came out for treatments that they really shouldn't have, and should have been clear to them that this was a bad idea. So will they, ever stand up and admit to what had happened? I think they're already kind of changing the playbook. You probably noticed that when they put out things, it's all about individualized care, and they no longer have citations under their policy statements because they know their citations would be destroyed.
Hmm.
So things are changing,
Yeah.
but they're not. They no longer saying evidence-based life saving because they know that that's been disproven. So as if all their slogans have fallen away, they just are like, okay, well, it's all individualized care. We're going to go on that one, and we're against. And this they come out with this. Oh, we're against the legal system and the legislatures getting involved with
Yeah.
medicine. And then I'm like, well, hold on. You guys supported those 28 states with the conversion therapy bans, like broadly written, basically shutting down therapy. So are you saying you're not for those? No. So
Yeah.
anyway, they're still
Yeah.
talking out both sides of their mouth. But
What
yeah,
was
I don't know.
what was your risk assessment coming out, as it were?
Well, I'm at a place in my life where I'm not going to have someone tell me what to think or how to practice or what to do, right? So the people who are trying to tell me don't have any credibility with me. Like, for instance, the
Hmm.
gender doctors, they're not like well-rounded psychiatrists. All they do is gender. This is the only thing they do. They have no publications in anything else. They have
Yeah.
no criteria, so they're not really someone that you'd normally respect on any other topic. They've not proven themselves to be,
I
high
wouldn't
functioning.
respect them on that topic, let alone anything else, but that's just me.
Well, yeah. So this is, this group of basically ideologues that run this. I don't have to worry about like not being in with them because I really could care less.
Okay.
Is it when you enter into these things, do you have some fear about what's going to happen, and if their stories, families being attacked and or being certainly being attacked online, and your your personal credibility, or someone's going to find something on so I mean, yeah, maybe that stuff people can try, but I would also say that um because of the career that I've had, in addition to, I volunteer at the refugee clinic. I'm on the board of a couple organizations. I give money away for a yoga service organization. I'm give money to the Prison Yoga Project. I'm trying to, move forward a lot of
Hmm.
discussions about what are called federally qualified health centers, which are primary care centers. And it's like actually the largest primary care network. It's funny because people don't know what this is, but it's a really great thing. And it's providing, it has to be in a disadvantaged neighborhood, but it's providing medical services. And usually we're going to have dental and WIC and, mental health services all at a one-stop shop.
Hmm.
And so these federally qualified health centers are incentivized. They get paid a little bit more if they do all the stuff they're supposed to do. And so now people are helping those grow.
Hmm.
And if we as a country could keep growing those, we could end up providing like high quality primary care to everyone in the country, with the dental and the mental health and all that stuff that people really need.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to forward these things that are actual practical steps forward that the world could, make a better place with, and would particularly help disadvantaged communities. And all of I mean, they can go through anything I've ever written, and you're not going to be able to label me as some kind of ideologue or right wing or any of that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So, they can, if they want to make criticisms, they can have at it.
Hmm. What's been a piece of literature or book or even just a thinker that's really shaped you in your professional, psychologically, your practice?
Well, it's funny because I love Nassim Nicholas Taleb,
Yeah.
and I love Steven Pinker, and they feud a little bit, but those are two geniuses. Both of those guys have ginormous brains and have made incredible contributions. I mean, I think in terms of the evolutionary look at cognition and how our
Hmm.
brains work and all that, Steven Pinker is the person that I turn to.
Yeah.
Nassim Taleb is a person who basically gives you these rules for life that helps you cut through BS. And so
Hmm.
there's been a a revolution kind of in how we fool ourselves and how the human brain is constantly making errors. And so we
Hmm.
know that we have to make decisions. What Nassim Taleb says, risk assessment under opacity. So we have this like, we really don't know what's going to happen, but we have to make choices. And one of the things that I got from Nassim Taleb that I really like is if you stick to simple principles and you're working out of simple principles, you often make a better decision
Hmm.
than you would if you use some complex formula. And I wrote a paper about this
Hmm.
being that I used Michael Pollan's In Defense of Food, and his subtitle was like "Eat food, mostly plants, not too much." And when he says eat food, that means eat things that come off of trees and out of gardens and not factory made food like products.
Yeah.
And so if you stick to that rule, let's say you only have one rule, that I'm going to eat food, that actually gets a better health result than all these people who are like, I'm going to count this much protein, I'm going to have this much of this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
That's
so
dangerously close to common sense, what you're describing.
I often say a lot of stuff that I'm proposing is applied common sense.
Yeah, applied
So
common
yeah,
sense.
yes.
That should be like if you start a
Uh-huh.
philosophy school, that should be
Yeah.
what you.
Well, I'm also a big promoter of like physical activity and movement. I had mentioned about the yoga, but
Yeah,
sports, working out, like living, having a vigorous physical body is
yeah,
really good for your mental health. And
yeah,
it seems a little weird that we are leaving so much on the table in terms of like if people want to turn around their mental health, how they eat and how they move their body are things that I've been promoting, my whole career. But I think
mm,
we're, we have such a medicalized system that we're like, hey, you got depression? What's the pill for that? Oh, this pill here,
yeah,
rather than thinking, well, what's the stuff that you put in your mouth every single day? And what are the
yeah.
things, how do you move your body and all that? So,
Hmm.
yeah, so I think those are two. I mean, I read a lot, so we can keep going if you want to talk about authors.
Oh, throw another one into the mix.
Well, I like Joseph Heinrich's The Weirdest People in the World and The Secret of Our Success. Those are two great recent books about human cumulative culture and the influence of really he traces back from he talks about like how different societies can only survive in a lot of places on the globe because they have tinkered with stuff and they figured out what works and how to, let's say, process a certain plant so they can turn it into food.
Yeah,
But if you show up like shipwrecked there, like the people die, right? Because they don't know, it took them a long time to figure out these things that allow us to live in different ecological niches.
yeah,
So therefore, we really naturally are a species that as kids tune into what's going on in our culture. We're very influenceable. We have that long period of time to sort of figure out what are the rules, but we often don't really know why the rules work. We just tend to want to follow the rules. And actually, that's evolved and really makes sense considering our ecological pressures that we have.
yeah.
And so he also explains how we went from many gods all over the place to like one monotheistic powerful god which actually is
Hmm.
good at enforcing people following rules and not cheating and not stealing, this type of stuff, and that this was a big change in our cultures and maybe helped us adapt well to and kind of created. That's what he's so many different pressures. But when he's like talks about weird, which is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Hmm.
And funny enough, like all the psychology stuff that's in the textbook, it's all studied on people from American universities, usually
Hmm.
undergraduates.
Hmm.
So we took this little, what he calls weird psychology, this very shaped up different psychology, and we did studies on it. And we pretend like we actually know what the human brain is
Hmm.
supposed to be look like because only we're sort of stuck in this weird paradigm. And people don't actually think like us if they grow up on the bush or somewhere else. This is
Hmm.
a very weird way to be. But it probably, back to his other book, The Secret of Our Success, helped the Western world get rid of our clan orientation or our small family orientation and join the larger culture with capitalism, with other sort of bigger ideas like freedom and equality and all this kind of stuff, which would not have been possible without that shaped up psychology.
This is kind of political. Do you think that that's a good thing that this one kind of subset of people have universalized themselves and succeeded in conquering the world several times over, but kind of lost a sense of home, lost a sense of clanship, kingdomhood, nationality, like, because it can go into these kind of globalist projects that the individual human and the family and all the structures that that we, our race, not our race, but our species grew up in. Is it good that we're liberating ourselves from that?
Well, I don't have an answer to that. I think that that's a good open question. And I think if you read Heinrich's work, you will see that there's a lot of trade-offs that have come through the path that we're on. And if your sort of village in Germany was Protestant and your village in Germany was Catholic, you can look like a couple hundred years later and they have different traditions and different, so things that get in the culture kind of stay there. And, which one's better may depend on what changes in the economy come, what other things happen, a lot of external factors. And I think, what is the right balance between a universalist, way to see things on some of these modern shaped up psychologies and other more tribal clan based, like where's the line? I mean, I think that's a unanswerable question without more specifics.
Okay. Yeah. There's just a lot of discussion about liberalism's kind of being taken for granted as the product of a certain culture. And you brought that up with the weirds, and like there's this very specific culture that tricked itself into thinking that it is the universal template of man, and then champion even this idea that there is such a thing as a universal template of man. So it's just an interesting conversation. I was looking for your input into that.
Well, Well, I can say one thing is that it seemed like the Asian cultures that had a long tradition of schooling and family orientation and, are more collectivist, but they could adopt a lot of the weird paradigms with not that much difficulty from their original culture. And their original culture provided them with a lot of tools and strategies for living, back to like what, this enculturation process, how important it is, that they could then come and succeed incredibly well in the system that the weird system that we built.
Yeah.
So I think, part of the answer to your question may be, who are we talking about? So yes, it may be that we're clearly, the whole thing about weird is to point out that how narcissistic we are to think that we're the only people and that our way is the right way, and that we this psychology is sort of the normal psychology and everyone else's psychology is the abnormal psychology.
Is there a trend in psychology that you find particularly interesting, or like something emergent, leaving that gender stuff aside?
So I've always thought that it is unfortunate that we don't put evolutionary principles as more a primary part of how we look at life and how we look at medicine and how we look at psychology. So I think the underemphasis of those principles of how we evolved and what sort of our brains like a Swiss Army knife with all these different features and what do they do? And sometimes they are in conflict. And so people come up with psychological things about conflict that's real, because part of our brain may want something and part of our brain may want something that's totally different. Yeah. And so I think evolutionary psychology can provide us a basis for how we should look at life and psychological decisions and what this brain is good at and what it's not good at.
Yeah. Is there development or a push for that you see people adopting that framework or being open to interdisciplinary kind of? cross-pollination?
Yes and no. I think there's plenty of people like Steven Pinker who's super erudite and can apply evolutionary principles to, social
Variety of
psychology
things,
and,
yeah.
and I think Jonathan Haidt does a good job of applying those same principles. So people are meshing these things. However, it is an underutilized approach overall. So, but I think over time it can only grow.
Yeah, it's a very powerful storytelling tool, if nothing else. And I could see it being adopted, especially when dealing with a juvenile or somebody, to kind of help them with the narrative, to understand why they would be acting this way, or why people act this way, or why culture acts like this. It's got a lot of explanatory power.
It sure does. I mean, I think you also can use whatever culture someone comes from, and if they come from any culture, you can find similar wisdom in their own culture usually to say exactly the same things that you would say from a evolutionary. I mean, I could say like, hey, we're just slightly evolved primates and we screw up and we do the wrong thing and we mess up. I mean, how could we not? We're just primates. I mean, we're not really that fancy. Or you can say we're all born sinners. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
you can find any of the great traditions that contain lots of wisdom that really distill a lot of the same phenomenon.
Yeah. Again, on a long enough timeline, all wisdom becomes indistinguishable from common sense. In a way.
Well, yeah. That reminds me of a great Nassim Taleb thing that I believe is called the Lindy effect, but it's for non-perishable, for ideas and stuff. The longer it's been around, the longer it will continue to be around, and the newer it is, the faster it goes away. So the good news is all these terrible new ideas will probably go away. And in 1,000 years, people will look back and go, can you believe how stupid those people were?
Yeah, well, either we breed those bad ideas out of existence or the bad ideas breed us out of existence. So, speaking evolutionarily, where can people find you? Is there a repository of your writing? Do you write? Do you have a place where
the Restore Childhood Substack has a few recent things that I wrote, and then there's academic articles and such. I'm now more I've decided to enter the public sphere more. So you had mentioned like, oh, did you want to, and I've been very hesitant, and I do forensic work. So I, testify in court, and anything that I say out in the world can be held against me at some point. But I still am thinking at this point in my life that I will pivot somewhat to be more forward facing. I'm not excited about being on Twitter or X though, because I don't like going back and forth with people that I think are not, is not good use of my time.
Yeah.
So, but I think I will be writing more or trying to do more. Certainly presentations and podcasts. I'm going to be doing more of. Yeah.
Do you feel a book being thrust upon you from your soul or your destiny? Do you think you'll?
Many people have told me for years that I should write a book. So I've had that many times because I have broad erudition. So I'm good at pulling things together, and I know a lot about the world.
You have BE,
and
broad erudition. It's like a condition.
Something like that, yeah. Well, I have degrees of freedom rather than degrees of restriction, like some people.
Okay.
But yeah, I might. I maybe just need a pithy title, but yes, it could be coming.
What would it be?
Well, at different times, I've had different things that I felt like I wanted to write. I wanted to write on ADHD for a while.
Okay.
And I was going to entitle my book "Just Say No." And just
to Ritalin. Oh, okay,
yeah. But just the whole, it would be about how the paradigm of ADHD has actually worked against a lot of people, right? This whole idea that and certainly like treatments for ADHD for people who have severe neurocognitive problems are great treatments, and I'm not trying to diss them, but I am saying that we're in it was a while ago I saw this stat, but at one point not that long ago America was using 80% of the world's stimulants. Are we getting this great result for this very medicalized view of kids behavior and learning problems? I would say no.
Okay. So you're broadly against methanized civilization. You don't think that it's shaping out?
Well, I would say that whenever Churchill said, we build our buildings and then they build us, and that so our ideas and concepts become
Yeah.
a part of us for better or worse. And
Yeah.
when you make a concept that these problems are in a brain that we're going to call an ADHD brain, when we have like 80 to 100 billion neurons with 120 trillion connections, and we want a
Yeah.
yes no on whether that's an ADHD brain and a yes no for, hey, we're going to give you this medicine to solve these problems. I just think we're getting into a incredibly reductionist science, and I'm not against the use of medicines, but it seems to me that that has become a go-to, and I see it all the time. You see kids in corrections that they've been on a lot of pills their life, but they never actually had their needs met. They may have been in a really traumatic, horrible situation,
Yeah.
but they were put on, something to help them, focus better or whatever. It's just like we have to know what
Yeah.
we're doing in our business.
The harkening back to the very beginning of the conversation, where you said that your career has been very humbling. It seems like one of the biggest issues with medicine comes down to this lack of humility in the face of, I don't know, creation or just in the face of what a human being is. And so a lot of these missteps is, hubris mixed with narcissism, mixed with willful ignorance of the limitation of these different interventions that pop up over time.
Yeah, I tell the residents if someone's getting to a fourth or fifth medicine, medicines are probably not the solution for the problem.
Yeah.
But you see it over and over again that people are like, okay, we're going to just try another. Maybe this medicine will solve this problem. Well, there's just problems that we can't solve with medicines, and we have to consider we may be making people's lives worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's to making people's lives better. Kris, you said that you refuse to banter on Twitter, but are you on there? Can people, I'll link to all your different places, but if people want to contact you, how would they go about doing that?
I think if you put my name up, it comes up on Twitter.
Okay.
I just never post anything.
The link
And
will be
then,
down there, then.
yeah. And then the Restore Childhood site has some of my writings, that Substack. And then there's also where the toolkit is.
Yeah. I'll link to that toolkit. What's the plan or your hope for this gender toolkit? Who
Well,
needs
what
it?
we would
Where
what
does
we
it need to
would
go?
like for one, I would love. I know you have access to and have talked with a lot of detransitioners. We would love to hear their viewpoint on it, and like, could we make it better? Is there things that maybe they would know about how these things in school affected them that we're not emphasizing?
Yeah.
And we are trying to get good information into the hands of parents and give them a mechanism whereby if they feel that their school is not doing right by their kid, they can approach it in a evidence-based and informed way.
Yeah. And strong arm the school back into a truth seeking institution.
Seems like a good idea.
Yeah. Kris, thank you very much for your afternoon. It's great to talk to you. It was great to meet you in person back in October, but it's been really fun to talk to you virtually this July.
Well, I enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.
Cool. I'm going to end the recording there. Thanks, Kris.